order the regular meeting, June meeting of the Finance Committee. All committee members are present, as well as we have all four.
Everybody but Kevin.
Everybody but Kevin of the other council members. Thank everybody for being here today. As a reminder, we have recently had several special meetings of the Finance Committee to approve the budget. That was approved in a modified format at the last special meeting of the Finance Committee. So today, we're not going to be talking about the budget. We're going to be talking about what I would call regular order of business. With that, we will begin with the consent agenda. Are there any items anyone would want pulled? Ms. Adams has already given me C1. Are there any others anyone wants pulled?
Move for approval of the balance of the
Second.
consent agenda.
We have the motion, the second, approve the balance of consent agenda. If everybody could please vote. We come up. And those are approved. If the city clerk will please read C1.
Item C1, resolution authorizing recapture and reallocation of certain CARES Act funds, $48,000.
Ms. Adams, this is yours. You may have the floor.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Chair Clark, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and the
Good
members of
afternoon.
the committee and council. Did you want me to give a little background on this?
No. What I want to know is, I see where your department or the area decided on where the reallocation of the funds will go. But I was wondering again, and I'm kind of glad that we get a chance to see it, why wouldn't we look at or poll the council as to where we want this money, or give us some options? Preferably for me, I'd like to see this money go towards the eviction diversion program. I know that we put in the budget, we had, I forgot, Councilman Clark, we had some money still left over. Mr. Garrity, Mr. Rao, maybe you can speak to it. We had some money left for the eviction diversion, and we basically just added 45,000 or something to it in the budget, this budget that we're going to approve on Tuesday. But my thing is, with the way evictions are going for people right now in Winston-Salem, which is basically 2/3 of Forsyth County, and I think it would be a good thing for us to move that money to that program versus the United Way. Ms. Tony.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Clark, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, Mayor, and members of the council. This particular pot of money is restricted. It's part of the CARES Act, COVID Relief Fund, CDBG, HUD federal dollars. So the reallocation of this dollars have to be very specific, mainly around homeless services and services and continuum of care. We did, the legal aid contract had some existing resources, about 50,000 remaining that they had not spent. And so that's a separate pot of money, but this money is restricted to some federal guidelines.
But the federal guidelines say rapid rehousing service, homelessness prevention funds, and landlord incentives. That's what this says, eligible activities for the funds. But basically, that's what eviction diversion is in a sense. Even if we flip it and we just do it, can we earmark it for eviction diversion, or are we just going to put it all in this pot and give it to United Way for their homeless prevention assistance?
We will be glad to look at it or revisit it. The issue is the money is time sensitive. And so what we do is when agencies are unable to spend the resources, we recapture the resources so that we can allocate it to resources that can use it rapidly for the stated purpose. The legal aid, the existing contract, they haven't spent all of the existing resources. So we would have to return these funds, I think by September. If we don't spend them.
I thought the guidelines, the council, HUD canceled the guidelines.
They've offered several extensions.
Yeah.
To several parts of the money, but when we allocate the resources for legal assistance, it's salary, and so that'll extend what we are able to do in terms of deadline.
But it says that the CDBG CV funds, the deadline is June 2026.
That's not for this balance.
And then it says, I know on the first line of page 2, it says that the grant funds had a deadline to expend 80% funds by June 2023. However, HUD has canceled that deadline. The deadline to expend all community development block grant CV funds is June 2026.
Yeah.
Can we talk about this?
Yes.
I'd like to pull.
Let me suggest, we do not meet in July, so if we don't vote on this next week, we won't vote on it till August. May I suggest we simply move this forward as a placeholder? You two can talk between now and next Monday, or Tuesday, excuse me. And if you want to modify it, then we can.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion to approve C1 then?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion second to approve C1, and with the understanding that Ms. Adams, Ms. Tony will chat, and if there's any amendments you want to make, we can make it then, but that'll keep it moving forward.
Thank you.
If City Clerk will please poll the committee. That is approved. Thank you very much. By the way, before I forget it, for all you folks out there, we will not meet next Monday. That's Juneteenth. It's a city holiday. If you come here on Monday, you will not be able to get in the building. But if you want to come to the full council meeting, which the budget will be voted on at that meeting, it will be Tuesday, the 20th at 6 o'clock in this room. Thank you. We will now go to the general agenda. We have 5 items on general agenda. We will start with G1.
Item G1, Citizens Budget Advisory Council Report.
Stash, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the committee and council. The first item on your general agenda here is related to the Citizens Budget Advisory Council, or CBAC. As you know, they meet annually and have a work plan. Mr. Fred Salisbury was elected chair of the CBAC this year, and he's going to give a brief presentation on their recommendations related to some additional collaboration opportunities with the county potentially, as well as one thing in the proposed budget. So without further ado, I will turn it over to him.
Thank you very much for having me here today.
Your name and address for the record, please.
Sorry, Freddie Salisbury, 137 West End Boulevard.
Thank you.
Our work plan today was we were given, or for this year, we were given a charge by the city manager to look at city-county collaborations, and originally in 3 areas: affordable housing, mental health response, and social service programs. At our first meeting, the Garrity and the county manager came and spoke to us, and we decided after their discussion to add law enforcement response as well as a way of something to look at with city council, city-county collaboration, okay? So in doing this, we had several resource meetings. The staff of the city performed research on 4 other major metro areas in the state, and to get ideas as to what they do. Then we heard from several local experts. Marla Newman talked about affordable housing, both the city and county programs and areas where they might collaborate in the future. Dennis Price from the county talked about behavioral health services in the county in areas where the city and county already work together, and especially talked about the mobile integrated health unit. Katie Allen gave a very informative talk where she talked about the difference between our city and county polices, talked about where the services they share already, and especially talked about 911 centers and response, and we have a very strong recommendation from that coming up. She also talked about general city-county consolidation that other places have pursued, but we have not. Okay, so affordable housing. First, the city staff found when they reviewed other metro areas that in North Carolina, other counties are getting more into this than our county. It is primarily done by cities, but there are Wake County in particular is getting more involved in this. And so we have three things that we'd like to see explored. One is to discuss with the county where their goals are aligned and where we might collaborate, such as in other metro areas. In particular, also on the funding of affordable housing, perhaps jointly to avoid duplication, so perhaps a joint advisory board so that make things more efficient for both the government and nonprofits. And we also would like to look at the UDO and compare it to other counties and cities to make sure the community standards are similar to what in other places in the state have for duplexes and infill standards. But if you have any questions, please interrupt me. So. The behavioral health and social services ones were kind of merged together. And so first of all, we did notice that other cities were moving more into mental health service areas. Durham has a heart program. Greensboro has something called the Be Heart program. Both of those seem very similar to our very new BEAR team. And, we were very pleased to see that the city was starting this team. And I live downtown. I've actually seen them around. They're around. They're obvious. One thing we want to make sure was that the BEAR team has the resources for sort of outside mental health in particular to make sure that they can help refer many of these people who are homeless to housing services and to make sure they can transport to service providers at the county's Highland facility, which is outside of the city's purview.
Salisbury, let me interrupt you real quick.
Go for it.
Would one of the staff members please inform the audience what BEAR is?
My apologies.
What it stands for and what it is. Ms. Tony.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Clark. BEAR is the Behavior Evaluation and Response Team. It is an alternative to police response. Initially came out of Public Safety Committee, Councilmember Taylor, and some community advocates advocated for alternative response. What it does is allows police to respond to true police calls that are crime-related and be freed up from mental health-related calls. So many of the 911 calls that come in do not require a police response, and rather social workers, crisis counselors, and people that can provide the adequate interventions for people experiencing a mental health crisis. And so we have, I think, a staff of 7. They are scheduled to pretty much work 24 hours. And so people call 911, and they are now a new first responder.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Salisbury, please continue.
Yeah, and CPAC was very encouraged by the presence of this. Then, not related to behavioral health services, we have one recommendation concerning social services funding, which is that we would like to see the city and county explore possibly joint review of requests for funding, because it looked like there was a fair amount of duplication, and the nonprofits are kind of having to sort of divide up their proposals. And it would be probably more efficient for both us and the nonprofits to sort of integrate that review process. Not necessarily the funding process, but at least the review process. And law enforcement services. Okay, this is where, after our discussion with Katie Allen, we have our strongest recommendation, which is it seems like it's a very good time to consider fully consolidating 911 emergency response. The fire response is already consolidated, and city and county emergency communications will be in the same building near each other. So it seems like it would be a very easy, low-hanging fruit to actually consolidate them now, and it would, increase response time. Having them in the same building will be an improvement already, but actually consolidating it would be a good low-hanging fruit. And there were reports were given of many, many statewide examples of such consolidated 911 responses. So that's our strongest recommendation. We also thought that after Katie Allen talked with us, that we might want to explore other models for more consolidated police response as well. But the 911 is our strongest recommendation. And then last but not least, and this was actually something that came up in our look at the budget, is for the last couple of years, it seems like the fire department has requested lots of personnel that don't get budgeted. These aren't people that aren't hired, but people don't make it in the budget. And we were concerned as to basically the origin of this. Is this a matter of trying to get up to ISO 1, or is this a real issue with keeping our current level of fire protection? And so we would like to see an understanding of where why it's such a high request, basically, and whether or not how important it is to public safety. Questions?
Questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
Again, myself, on behalf of the council, we'd like to thank you all for the work that you do to help give some more insight into the missions and, strategies of the city towards, meeting our budget, as well as the, expectations of our citizens. I know it's not easy, but thank you for taking the time over the years and years of everyone that has been so diligent about coming and providing us with this information. Trust me, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll bring that back to the committee.
And thank your committee as well.
Introduce the rest.
Yeah, is your other committee members here by
I
chance?
don't believe anybody else made it today. No one else is here, but I'll bring that back to the committee. We have one more
Okay,
meeting.
because I take your recommendations very seriously, and I appreciate them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Questions? I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now go to G2. Secretary, please, or clerk, please read that.
Item G2, resolution of the City of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, approving an installment purchase contract and related matters.
Ms. Latham, could you introduce this to us?
Good afternoon, Chair Clark, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and members of City Council. This item would approve for staff to execute a contract for an installment financing. The city's practice has been to finance equipment such as vehicles, fire trucks, and other equipment, some also IS equipment, through a 5-year, 59-month installment loan. And our financial advisors assist in this process by reaching out to the banks and requesting interest rates that they might offer us. In this case, we would be requesting to borrow no more than $25 million to finance the equipment, and we have been offered a rate of 3.3207 from Bank of America, which was the best rate when we took into account other fees that might be charged.
And we do this every 2 to 3 years?
Around every 2 years. The last time we did this was January 2022.
What we're doing is basically financing equipment over its life cycle. 59 months is 5 years.
That's correct.
Therefore, you pay for the equipment as you use it, so to speak. And as opposed to going and getting an installment loan on everything we buy, we do kind of a blanket X amount of dollars, and that hopefully lasts us for a couple of years. And I traditionally remember 18 million. Is that historically what was used?
That's correct. However, the amount has been larger the last couple of times. We did 20 million in 2022, and we're requesting up to 25 million this year. The city has had some equipment needs that were deferred, and so we're playing a little bit of catch up on that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments? Is this an action item?
Yes.
It is. Can I get a motion to approve?
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion to approve G2. If the clerk will please poll the committee. That is approved. Thank you very much. We will now go to G3. Ms. Latham, you might as well just stay there.
Item G3, resolution regarding the issuance by the Public Finance Authority of its revenue bonds in one or more series in the principal amount not to exceed $20 million for the purpose of financing and refinancing certain projects for the benefit of the Salem Academy and College.
Ms. Latham, if you please introduce this.
Yes, good afternoon once again, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and members of City Council. This item is required by the IRS code. Salem College would like to seek financing for $20 million, and there is a provision in the IRS tax code that would require the city council to call for a public hearing and approve related resolutions for this financing. This does not constitute an endorsement of the projects or does not obligate the city in any way financially or otherwise. We do have the financial advisor for Salem College who is here tonight, should you have any questions.
We have done these for other times and other entities, if I remember.
We have done these for instance, for the Housing Authority.
I thought, yeah.
In those cases, it's a little bit different, and they're allowed to do their own public hearing, but in this case, the city council would need to call for the public hearing on the 20th.
So we'll have a public hearing at the Tuesday meeting.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Any other questions or comments on this?
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. If the city clerk please poll the committee. Mr. Mayor, you'll be in charge of that on the 20th.
Thank you. Got it.
Delegate that to you. Thank you. Glad we can help Salem College. That is approved. We will now go to G4.
Item G4, modification to approval of financial assistance to 1001 South Marshall LLC for community development purposes pursuant to NCGS 160D-1311.
Mr. Millett, this item goes back to 2018, which is, for some of us, a long time ago. So could you introduce this and kind of tie it all together from the beginning?
Sure. You're right, Councilmember Clark, and good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. Good afternoon. The project was originally approved in 2018, and I will walk council through the progression of how it went from approval to a modified request to another modified request that is being considered today. So the original approval in 2018 was for a $26 million project that involved the building at 1007.
It's not on our screen.
It's coming.
It's coming.
Is it coming? There we go. Excuse me.
Okay.
Start all over.
Yes. In 2018, council approved assistance of $2 million for a project at 1001 South Marshall Street. At the time, it was for a center for creatives, for the ecosystem, and for the culinary community. City funds were designated specifically for hard construction, for public infrastructure, and public enhancements. The funds, city funds, would be dispersed in alternating tranches along with non-city secured funding, and the developer needed to secure all financing before any city funds were dispersed. Most recently, the request came to modify that this committee heard back late in 2002. There were some changes that the project had evolved over time. They were now looking at a two-phase project that included the adjacent building, which is 1007 South Marshall Street. The request was for the $2 million to be eligible for use for construction in Phase 1, which again is that 1007 building. It came as an information item to Finance Committee, and then Council sent it back to Finance Committee in January. The request has evolved to what Council is considering today. It remains a $2 million request that would be split with $1 million committed for Phase 1, which is the 1007 building, and Phase 2, which is the 1001 building. The funds, city funds, would be the last dollars in to each phase, and the city's commitment would terminate for both phases, would terminate if Phase 1 is not operational within 18 months of execution of the development agreement, and Phase 2 would terminate or sunset if the second phase is not operational within 24 months of activation of Phase 1. And I'll note here that the space would be considered operational or active once it has a minimum of 10 employees on site and a minimum of 10,000 square feet in use. The developer is here in support of the project, and there's a brief recap that they would be able to give.
Okay. Mr. Stringer or Ms. Norfleet, would one of y'all like, or both like to come up and say whatever you'd like to say, sir? If you give your name and address for the record.
Bill Streever, 3733 Billhaven Road.
Thank you. Continue.
So a brief overview.
Yes.
Yeah, so as,
Say whatever you want to. I'm going to give you back 5 minutes. Go ahead.
and we appreciate the city's support. It's been a long road. Many of our projects have very complex financing stacks, and we're going tomorrow to Dayton to celebrate the closing on our second phase of the Dayton Arcade, which is a 700,000 square feet, $160 million project that has similar attributes to this in terms of a infrastructure supporting the entrepreneurial community in Dayton. It includes a shared use commercial kitchen like we have here. And a intensive entrepreneurial support program, particularly focused on minority and women entrepreneurs. So we're excited about hitting that benchmark after a lot of effort between the city and county and the state up in Ohio. So this one, as described, is a total $45 million project, 150,000 square feet in the 2-building. Phase 1, we look to close late summer, early fall, and have operational by the second quarter of next year, and that's the 1007, the white building you see on your screen, the old Camel City Coach building. That would be the permanent home of Cobblestone Farmers Market, a first phase of the shared use commercial kitchen incubator, and other supportive businesses and entrepreneurial support activities. The second phase, which is the old Bonson plant at 1001 Marshall, is 28,131,000 square feet. It will, as described, will close financing within 18 months after phase 1 is completed and occupied. The uses for the 2-phase project are state-of-the-art facilities, shared facilities, and support programming for 3 kind of focus entrepreneur groups. One's around culinary, agriculture, scale-up facilities, building on the 10-year history of Beta Verde Kitchen and the 45 to 60 vendors at Cobblestone Farmers Market. The second will be around textile and apparel. Same thing, state-of-the-art equipment facilities, entrepreneurial support to help people with ideas scale up. And then thirdly, working with the UNC School for the Arts Film School facilities and support of creative digital arts, animation, and film. Which we're very excited about. So those are the 3 focus areas for the 2-phase project. The impact is, Cobblestone Market alone, we're excited about having a year-round permanent home. Average attendance at Cobblestone is 3,100 folks. Depends on the time of the year and the weather. As I said, 45 to 60 vendors. Has a very active SNAP EBT outreach program in terms of improving healthy food access. We believe over the first 3 years, once the full project is completed, there will be a minimum of 250 jobs generated and 150 entrepreneurs supported between the 3 focus areas of culinary, agriculture, food entrepreneurs, of textile and apparel, and creative digital arts and film. So that's the idea. The long-term goal is to have a debt-free building with nonprofit ownership so that we can have fantastic facilities offering the lowest possible occupancy costs for these startups and entrepreneurs and nonprofits and service programmings. That's our general goal on our projects. is to create this pathway to ownership for long-term sustainability in support of these community-facing programs using historic tax credits, new market tax credits, grants, and other funding sources to get there. Some of our projects have as many as 25 or 30 different funding sources as we work to get to that ultimate goal. But in the end, great facilities, the lowest possible occupancy costs for long-term sustainability of these programs and services.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Millett. Do you have anything else you want?
No, sir, that is it.
A couple questions. One is, do we have his, he refers to his stack, his funding sources for both these buildings or his projections?
We do have a sources and use table.
Can you just be sure we're provided that?
It should be attached to your agenda.
Yes.
It's there.
Is it?
Yeah.
That's the third one down.
Okay, hang on a minute.
Sources and uses.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Can you comment on this?
Yes, sir. They are, as Mr. Striever had mentioned, the historic tax credits are a big part of the project. For Phase 1 at $16.2 million, have to add my reading glasses, excuse me. $16.2 million, where the city funding of $1 million would be the essentially the smallest source for the funding. Equity in the project, there are debt from private lenders for the project, and again, the tax credits are a big part of that. For the second phase, which is 1001, I did not see the city designated as a source of funds for that, but there would be $1 million.
I see it.
Perhaps I need new reading glasses.
At the top.
It's in blue.
No, for
But
phase
it's not
2.
in phase 2 at the bottom.
Oh. Excuse me. I'm just worried about phase 1 right now.
Okay.
So explain, I want to be sure our city funds are protected, and reading this, it says that our funds would be held in escrow until these other fund sources or stacks are identified and secured. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, it would be that the other sources must be secured before city funding could be released, held in escrow, but the other sources must also be obtained or held in escrow before city funds could be released.
Okay, and then in what order would they spend them?
I'm sorry?
What order would they spend them?
I believe it would be the way it would be written would that the city funds would also be the last money spent into the project.
Okay. Well, if you could check to be sure in the second phase, 1001 Marshall, that the city money is listed in there somewhere, get that updated. Thank you, sir. Any questions or comments, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you. And Ken, I think you've done a great job of restructuring this. I do like the provision that there's a sunset in regarding the investment if it's not underway and the timelines are not met. Just to remind everyone that the total city investment is the same. Basically, it's breaking into two phases. City's last in, as Ken just mentioned, and last to be spent. We end up with a nonprofit ownership down the road. $45 million project is nothing to sneeze at. So in that particular area, turning that old building into a very productive use. I don't know if you knew this, but Mr. Striever was one of the ones who conceptualized the innovation quarter initial phases with the Bailey Power Plant and the biotech place. So he's got a real visionary look at these older buildings. So I think we're fortunate to have that. And I think Ken's done a great job of structuring it. Mr. Chairman, I know you're involved as well in that.
Any other questions or comments from? I have polled my committee members, and Mr. Taylor, I haven't heard from you. There is some concern expressed by other committee members on this. Do you have any thoughts that you would like to share?
I like the idea of the economic investment. I think this is something I can support.
Okay. Having polled all 4 members, I do not think I have 3 votes to move it forward with them a recommendation, so I'm going to ask for a motion to move it forward without recommendation, so it'll go to the council next Tuesday.
So moved.
And I'll second that. So the motion is to move this forward without recommendation to the full vote of the city council on Tuesday, next week. If the city clerk will please poll the committee. We're coming.
So yes is to move it to full council
Yes.
without recommendation.
Recommendation. That's the motion. That is approved. Thank you. That's moved forward without recommendation. So it'll be at council Tuesday night. If you would come back, I would recommend it. Thank you very much. And I think that was nope. Take that back. We've got one more.
Yeah.
Last item, city clerk, please read this one.
Item G5, information regarding funding request from Creative Corridors Coalition for design of the Peter Oliver Pavilion Gallery.
This is an information only, and for our Creative Corridor folks, oftentimes we will, at meeting 1, we will introduce the project, and in meeting 2, we'll vote on it. So this will give us time to get it introduced and people to think about it and get a better understanding. So with that, Mr. Rao, do you want to introduce this?
Yes, excuse me. Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tempore Adams, members of the City Council. As Chairman Clark noted, this is an information item. Over the last 5 years, the Creative Corridors Coalition has retained Walter Hood, who is a world-renowned African-American landscape architect, to develop a public open space on the site of the former 4-acre farm of Peter Oliver, who was an enslaved man who spent much of his life in the Moravian community of Salem and eventually became free. Coalition officials and Hood Design Studio have completed the schematic phase of design, and they actually presented the renderings for the Peter Oliver Pavilion Gallery at a public event at the Milton Road Center for the Arts in January. In early May, board members met with city staff to provide an update on the project and to request a financial contribution from the city to support the next phase of design, the design development phase. The ask totals $100,000, which will be paid over 2 years, $50,000 in fiscal year 2024 and $50,000 in fiscal year 2025. Robert Eggleston with the Coalition is here to provide a brief presentation. If the Finance Committee supports the request, then staff will bring back an action item in August that will identify a funding source and propose a contract with the Coalition to provide the funding.
Mr. Eggleston, you'll give your name and address for the record, and you have the floor.
Robert Eggleston, 4129 Gladstoneberry Road, Winston-Salem 27104. Chairman Clark, members of the Finance Committee, other members of City Council, thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of Creative Corridors Coalition's Board of Directors in support of the Peter Oliver Pavilion Gallery. The Coalition is proud of its 12-year record of success in fulfilling our tagline, which is working together to set Winston-Salem apart. The list of accomplishments for the Creative Corridors includes the twin arches over Research Parkway at Route 52, improvements along Salem Parkway, the lighted arches at Green Street Pedestrian Bridge, the landscape Strollway Bridge, which is adjacent to this project, and the upcoming improvements along Martin Luther King. For that project, Creative Corridors has in the bank $300,000 designated specifically to fulfill that promise that we made to support those improvements. All of this work was guided by our organization's visionary master plan and design guidelines, which was adopted by City Council in September of 2011. My predecessors on the Coalition Board raised the money, capital funds, worked with city and state DOT, and accomplished the commitments that were made in 2011. As we were completing those original projects, with the exception of Martin Luther King Drive improvements, which we're currently trying to work with the city and move forward and work with Duke Energy and others to see that completed, we became aware of the incredible story of Peter Oliver. In 1800, Oliver, a slave and an accomplished potter in Old Salem, purchased his freedom by working with his Moravian brethren. Then, as a freedman, he lived and farmed on the land just south of Salem Parkway, adjacent to where Muse is. You can see on your schematic. This plot of land is currently the property of the North Carolina DOT based on the Salem Parkway project, but it will be deeded back over to the city in 2024. Over the last 3 years since discovering the story of Peter Oliver, the coalition has become re-energized. Let me advance this slide if I can. There we go. Over the last 3 years, the coalition has been re-energized to seize this opportunity and envision an iconic site to celebrate the incredible cultural importance of this piece of property, and has spent more than $200,000 to create a solid concept with the help of world-class landscape architect Walter Hood. It is along the strollway that will link downtown and Muse Winston-Salem to Old Salem. It would be a welcoming public space to visit and to host events, and it will serve as an open-air museum telling Peter Oliver's incredible story, a story that started before 1800 and continues to this day by way of a large contingent of descendants who include 2 of our current board members, as well as Winston-Salem native and NBA star Chris Paul. We are asking City Council to support this effort, as it did with Creative Corridor's original vision more than a decade ago, with a contribution of $100,000. As was stated, we see this as $50,000 in each of the next 2 fiscal years. This support represents less than 20% of the $550,000 to $600,000 that we will incur to complete the design development and launch a capital campaign to raise the funds to construct the pavilion and create the open-air museum. Although we must hone in on those exact construction costs, current estimates point toward a capital campaign of $8 to $10 million. The campaign will include funds to start an endowment account for the long-term maintenance of the site. We humbly seek your committee's consideration to support Creative Corridors, and so that we can move forward with this project that will bring honor not only to the story of Peter Oliver, but to the city. Your support will bolster our efforts to successfully attract institutional and private donors. The proposed gallery will be an important stop along North Carolina's civil rights tour, and certainly at least a regional attraction. Our vision has already been picked up and aired nationally on NPR's Here and Now program. Finally, it should be noted that Peter Oliver gained his freedom on June 13th, 1800. So today is the 223rd anniversary of his gaining that freedom. How appropriate they will be ending this week by celebrating Juneteenth on Saturday. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I know there are no other members of the committee here. Would any of y'all like to speak? Okay. You don't have to.
Basically, executive committee, if there are any questions about construction, any questions about finance, we have our treasurer.
That's okay. You had your chance to be on TV, and that's it. Okay. This is information only. Are there any other comments, questions? I'll have a few at the end. Ms. Adams, would you like to offer anything?
Of course.
Please do.
Thank you, Chair Clark. I am sure I have met and talked with the Creative Corridors people for organization all the way back to the redo of, or the creation of Salem Parkway. I had just gotten on the council, or was running in the summer of '09, which required, they needed help in engaging the African-American community, like so many times happens in our history, whereas we're engaged to help, to make it happen. I told them I commend them on their work, and I do. But Councilmember Clark and this committee and the mayor I have something that's coming up too as well that's been going on for a while. The Bethania Freedmans out in Bethania, they are also descendants of slaves. They are trying to protect their legacy out there. They're getting the historic registry and all of that. They're asking for $35,000 to complete the process. And I'm sure, and trust me, they're in contact with me every day. They have a contingency that's also advocating on their behalf. So I'm asking this council, if we want to help make something happen and, show our appreciation and the history of enslaved people in this city and community, I would ask that you all consider Bethania Freedmans just like you would this or you have in the past. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Ms. McIntosh?
Just more of a comment. I would encourage us to look at both of those opportunities, both Bethania Freedman's and this, as being very worthwhile and something that the community has an opportunity to really make a big statement on. I do appreciate, we had a talk here in City Hall a while back where I was very frank about sort of pitfalls that I saw for long-term commitments to the city of Winston-Salem from a funding standpoint. I am happy to hear that there is talk of a fund or an endowment for long-term MAQ. I would think during the design process, I know Peter Hood is a phenomenal designer, but the work that I saw looked like it would be very expensive to maintain over the long term. Now, if y'all are willing to carry that, that's one thing, but I would not want the city to have to be able to step up to that. That is my biggest concern. I would like us to participate. I'd like to see the project happen. I'd like to see us participate. I don't have a big problem with us putting the land in as a donation. But I do think it needs to come in view of a larger effort of what we're doing around the city in multiple projects. But I am for the funding of this, but I do want to make sure that we have a clear vision of what it's going to cost us in the long run. Too often we go into projects and we don't see the real bill until years later. So that's my biggest concern. Also, staff resources. This has got to be something that is done outside of our staff resources. I've got sidewalk projects that I've been waiting on for 5 or 7 years. I can't in good conscience tell my constituents that we're spending staff time on a project that is going to come in front of them.
Mr. Larson. Go ahead.
I would simply like to say that my silence on this matter is not a lack of enthusiasm for the project, but rather the directive of the city attorney that being a member of the board, I am not allowed to participate in the discussion or the voting on this matter.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Scipio.
I would also agree with Mr. Larson that we are on the board and therefore we can't influence our council members on this.
I'll make a closing comment. I'm going to rain on your parade. I will not be supporting this project, bottom line. It's the wrong project at the wrong time in the wrong place. He may be a world-renowned architect or whatever he is, but he left out the bathrooms, and he does not have any understanding of the upkeep it would take to maintain this. This thing is loaded with glass that just begs for vandalism. I am also concerned that we have given, it may not be your group, it must be another group, $1.7 million to buy the bankruptcy building that still sits there unused. We've got to stop writing checks for things that are done halfway. And until I see some progress for the Muse building, we have a gorgeous redone Union Station to the tune of $18 million. The flagship, the third floor, which I have to be at a reception of the night, seems empty as well. And there are other facilities in town that we have built that sit empty. As I said, I think it's in the wrong location. It's right beside the interstate. I can't imagine anyone wanting to go have a picnic lunch beside a 4-lane interstate. it just, I just do not understand anything about this project that makes sense, and therefore I will not be supporting it for one penny for anything. Thank you. With that, Mr. Rao will poll the committee informally and decide what we want to do going forward. Thank you. Just for information only, thank y'all all very much. With that, we will stand adjourned.